Hello and welcome to Teaching Reading with Confidence. I am Malia. I'm a National Board Certified Teacher and the founder of the Reading Roadmap and also Play-Doh to Play-Doh, and I am thrilled that you're here today. We have so much fun planned and in store for you today, so thank you for sharing part of your Sunday with us. Now, I am joined by one of my favorite people on the planet. Her name is Kimberly, and she is our awesome community manager, and she's actually going to be hanging out with all of you in the comments section of our YouTube page. So as we're going along, if you have any questions that pop up along the way, please feel free to enter them in that comment box. Kimberly will answer them either herself, or if she wants to get a little bit more support, she will send them my way so that we can make sure to share the answer with everybody who's watching. And I promise you, this is a no dumb question zone because we have more than 3,500 people signed up to take this webinar today. And I promise that if you have any questions or something you're just not sure of, there are guaranteed to be other people who are wondering the same thing. So it will be extremely helpful, not only for you, but also for other people who are watching, if you will share that question in the comment box. So let's go ahead and take advantage of that comment box for a second. I know many of you have been popping in to share where you're tuning in from, and I'd love for you to share that and then also tell us what grade level you teach, just so that we get a good sense of who's going to be tuning in and we can make sure to really target what we talk about to each of your grade levels and make it as useful as possible for you. I'm actually coming in today from Seattle, just outside of Seattle, Washington, and usually you would hear a whole lot of running around going on upstairs. I'm in my home office, and usually I have my 3 kids who are ages 8, 6, and 4 playing around me. But my husband was kind enough to whisk them away. They went swimming, and now they're going to go grab something to eat. So I have a quiet house, and I'm excited to spend the next hour or so with all of you. Now, looking at our comments, we have Jennifer calling in from New York. Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us. We have Stephanie from Virginia, Mary from Texas, Dawn from Michigan. Oh my gosh, so many awesome places. We have a kindergarten teacher, Caitlin from Vancouver, Washington. So you're right up the road from me. Hi, Caitlin. And we have Kristen from North Carolina. She teaches kindergarten. We have Brooke, who teaches pre-K. And let's see, Ashley from New Jersey, who teaches kindergarten. Hi, Ashley. Thanks for coming. And also Kim from Georgia. She teaches kindergarten. Michelle from Missouri. Lots of kindergarten teachers I see. Well, we'll make sure that we try and address a variety of different ideas and activities for each of you. We'll gear all of our ideas toward that early childhood education level, just so that we can make sure that we focus on those pre-K, kindergarten, and first graders. But if you have any questions about something at higher grades, please feel free to ask those questions in the comments, just so that we can make sure to address your needs as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pop over to my screen here so you can take a look at my computer. Okay, let's go ahead and start by taking a peek at our agenda for today. So first, I'm going to break down the 4 signs kids are ready to read. Knowing what to look for will make it so much easier for your kids to start reading, because you'll easily identify whether they are ready to launch into that formal reading process or if you need to continue building up their foundation. Then we're going to move on to the 5-step plan for differentiating reading instruction. This simple system works in classrooms of all sizes and age levels, so it's a really beneficial and helpful game changer. Next, I'll help you save time by showing you what skills you need to assess with new readers and what you need to look at with more advanced readers. I'll even let you in on a common misconception about assessing reading comprehension. And understanding this misconception will actually take some serious pressure off of you and your students. And then finally, I'm going to break down my favorite tips for creating effective centers. I'm going to show you the 6 workstations that I set up and teach you my step-by-step for organizing students into effective work groups. I know there's a whole lot there, but be sure to hang out with me until the very end of this webinar so that I can fill you in on some amazing surprises I have in store. Now, I have to tell you, I am really terrible at keeping secrets, so I'm really counting down the seconds until I can finally spill the beans. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with these 4 signs that kids are ready to read. As I mentioned before, having this list handy is going to make it much easier to figure out when students are ready to dive in and start learning how to put letter sounds together to read words. We'll start by taking a big picture, 30,000-foot view of the 4 signs before breaking down each one. So sign number 1 is motivation. And let me tell you, this one is up at the top for a reason. It can really make or break a child's experience and your teaching experience too. Children must be interested in reading before they're going to put forth the effort to actually learn how to do it. It sounds simple, right? It makes sense. But thankfully, there are some really simple ways that we can build students' motivation if they don't have it yet. And I'm going to be sharing 2 proven strategies with you in just a minute. Next up on our list, we have print awareness, which is just a fancy way of saying that kids need to know the basics of how to read. Children should be able to point to the cover of a book, show you how to turn a page when they finish reading the words. They need to know how to hold the book so that it faces the right direction. Children should also understand that readers sound out words on a page by looking at letters and thinking about what sounds those letters make. They need to be able to then put those sounds together to make words. Now, they don't need to be able to actually sound out words. Sometimes this can be a source of confusion for teachers. At this stage, we just want them to understand the difference between letters and words. Letter recognition is lucky number 3 on our list. Now, before children read, they can typically name most of the letters they see. For instance, when they're driving down the road and they see a McDonald's sign, they might call out, "Oh, look, there's a letter M." But this is actually one of the most controversial skills in the teaching world. And in fact, you would not want to bring it up at a teacher's happy hour unless you are ready to get into a very heated debate. Some teachers strongly believe in teaching letter names first, while other teachers think that kids should learn sounds first. I'm going to tell you my opinion on the topic soon, but for now, just know that letter recognition means being able to identify most of the ABCs when kids see them. And last but not least on our list is phonological awareness, a fancy way of saying that children need to be able to hear the sounds in words and move them around to make new words. For example, I might ask, do cat and dog rhyme? Or I might say, what is the first sound in the word rabbit? Or even, how many syllables do you hear when you clap out the word rodeo? Ro-D-O. There are 3. I'm going to be sharing some simple and motivating ways to build these phonological awareness skills too. Now that we have a big picture view of the 4 signs, let's take a closer look at each one and start talking about simple ways we can build the skills in our classroom. I'm going to go ahead and start with motivation first. For many kids, building motivation means that they need to build confidence. Even as adults, we're not always excited to try something new if we think we're going to fail miserably at it. Imagine if I invited you to race against the Olympic sprinting gold medalist. Or I said, why don't you go and play a game with the world champion chess master? Doesn't sound like a very fun Sunday to you, does it? It definitely doesn't to me. Well, many students feel the exact same way about reading. They don't think they have a shot in the dark at being good at it, so they have no motivation at putting in even an ounce more effort. But there are some really easy things that we can do as teachers to help those students build motivation. And the first one takes absolutely 0 prep time. I love this one so much. Instead of calling students by their actual names, start calling them readers instead. For instance, you might say, first grade readers, please line up at the door for lunch. Or after reading time, you might say, readers, it's time to put our books away and get ready for recess. Just like a meditation CD repeats the same mantra over and over again, by calling your students readers every chance you get, they can start internalizing it and believing that it's true. Building confidence will naturally grow their motivation. Next, make reading fun by mixing it up. I'm going to be giving you this fun reading bingo sheet a little bit later so that you can make copies for your class. To play, students pick up one of the challenges to complete, pick one of the challenges to complete, and then they're going to cross off the box when they're through. Once they've crossed off all 25 challenges, they are going to have a bingo blackout and they'll win the game. Now the sheet has tons of fun ideas. They read a recipe and make it. They read under a bed. They read in the closet with a flashlight. There are tons of fun ideas and the list goes on. All of them are creative and playful ways to make reading really exciting and build students' motivation. So let's move on to that second sign that kids are ready to read, print awareness. Now, this is, again, knowing how to read a book. And to teach it, I love to use a strategy that's called thinking out loud. I pick just one or two skills to focus on at a time. One day it might be reading left to right across the page, or another day I might be focusing on knowing the difference between a letter and a word. I introduce a read aloud book to the class, and I explain that as I read, I'm going to be thinking out loud so that they can hear what's happening in my brain as I go along. And that's exactly what I do. As we read through the book, I think out loud and I show the kids how I'm applying our focus skill while I read. For example, if we're working on pointing underneath each word, I talk about how my finger is moving along with the words as I read them. As another example, if we're talking about using pictures, picture clues to figure out what's happening in a story, I tell them the guesses that I am making as I look at the pictures for clues about what might be happening. Thinking out loud is really simple, but it's incredibly effective, and it builds print awareness with our students because they can hear the step-by-step of what goes on in a strong reader's brain and then replicate it on their own when they are reading independently. Our third sign that kids are ready to read is recognizing those alphabet letters. And as I mentioned before, this sounds pretty clear-cut and drama-free, but it is actually very turbulent, because there's a huge debate about whether to teach upper or lowercase letters first, and there's also very heated opinions about whether to teach letter names or letter sounds first. As you may have already noticed, many people feel very strongly about their opinions, and we've actually run into this on our Play-Doh to Play-Doh page quite a bit. If we ever ask this question, we have very heated responses from our fabulous fans. So I know it's a source of great debate. Carolyn, one of our readers, asked, "Many of my kinders come to my class not knowing their alphabet letters and sounds. I currently start by teaching one letter and sound per week, but this means that it isn't until January that we're able to actually start sounding out those CVC words like cat and dog. Is there a better or faster way to get students sounding out words? Also, I was taught to begin with teaching the alphabet letters by starting with consonants that have one sound and leaving vowels until last because they're the most challenging. What order do you suggest teaching the alphabet sounds?" So my answer is going to show you my opinion about that heated debate, actually. I teach both of the upper and lowercase upper and lowercase version of the letter at the same time. And I have a brain charging alphabet chant that teaches those skills and then also teaches the letter names and a word beginning, let me back up. I have a brain charging alphabet chant that teaches the letter formation, so it shows the kids the letters. It teaches the letter name, the letter sound, and then a word that begins with that sound, which sounds like a high order, but let me show you how it works. For instance, we would say in this example, A is for apple, ah, ah, ah. So you can see they're learning the letter name, they're learning a word that starts with that letter, and they're learning the sound that that letter makes. In another example, we have B is for baby, B, B, B. Now, each of these letters has a little action movement that we do to go along with the words so that the chant combines movement and sound, and children's brains are able to learn it really quickly. Kids still need plenty of practice to apply this in their reading, but it gives them a major power launch because they're learning the upper and lowercase version of each letter. They're learning the letter name and the letter sound all at the same time. They're being exposed to everything all at once. Now, last but certainly not least on our list of skills kids need before they're ready to read is phonemic awareness. If you're scratching your head and secretly thinking that you still don't quite understand what phonemic awareness actually means, don't worry, you are not alone, but I have a trick. When you're on the phone, you hear someone talking to you. Now let's apply that to our tricky vocabulary word. Phonemic awareness starts with the word phone. So that reminds us that it has to do with hearing, just like you hear on the telephone. Phonemic awareness means hearing parts of words and moving them around. There are actually 5 major phonemic awareness skills. Rhyming is usually the first one that pops into people's minds. Rhyming means words that end with the same sound, like the words cat, bat, and sat, or the words hip, sip, and dip. You get the idea. Segmenting sentences is our next phonemic awareness skill, and segmenting just means breaking into parts. So for this skill, kids need to break words from a sentence into parts. For instance, if I said, the car is blue, a child would tell me that there are 4 parts to that sentence. The car is blue. 1, 2, 3, 4 different parts. Isolating phonemes means hearing the individual sounds in words. For this skill, I might ask a child to tell me the first sound in the word dog, which would be d. Or I might ask her to name the middle sound in the word cap. K, a, p. The middle sound would be a. Let's try one for practice. What is the last sound in the word bug? B, a, g. The last sound is the sound g. Did you get it right? When kids are isolating phonemes, they would say g is the final sound in the word, and hopefully you all did too. Now I'm going to give you another one. What's the first sound in the word shell? Sh. When kids are isolating phonemes, they would say that the first sound is sh. Going back to our list of those 5 phonemic awareness skills, next up is segmenting syllables. Just like segmenting sentences from a little earlier, syllable segmenting means breaking something into pieces. But this time, instead of breaking up a sentence, kids are breaking apart a word. The word elephant, for example, has 3 parts. L, a, funt. Now, let's try a different one. Helicopter. Why don't you try it on your own and see how many syllables you come up with. I always like to clap out my syllables. So the syllables I came up with were hel, I, cop, ter. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 syllables in the word helicopter. And finally, our last major phonemic awareness skill is swapping out phonemes. Since phonemes are the individual sounds in words, to practice swapping phonemes, I might ask a child to change the k in cat to b. What would the new word be? Bat. Let's try another one. Let's change the g in pig to t. The new word would, of course, be pit. Now, I know there is a whole lot of parts packed into just one pre-reading skill. So just for a quick review, the 5 major phonemic awareness skills we've talked about are rhyming, like the words bat, cat, and sat, segmenting sentences, when we count out the sentence, the car is blue, isolating phonemes by noticing sounds in words, like when we say dog starts with the d sound. We talked about segmenting syllables by breaking words into parts like L, a, funt. And we covered swapping phonemes, like when we changed the k in cat to b to make a new word, bat. To help you give kids a boost on their phonemic awareness skills, I'm going to pass along 2 activities that you can use with small groups or as literacy centers. The first freebie is a set of rhyming clip cards. In this example, kids would say the word cat, since it's the big picture at the top of the card, and then they would test whether that word rhymed with the options below it. So let's give it a try. Cat, stop. That doesn't rhyme. Let's try the next one. Cat, hat. That rhymes. So the kids would clip the hat. I am also going to give you a batch of Elkinen boxes kids can use to separate the sounds they hear in words. Now, this can be tricky because sometimes people confuse spelling a word with sounding out the parts of the sound parts. For these boxes, we are only focusing on the sounds, not the spelling, not the letters. So in this example, students would sound out the word B by touching that first green box on the left and saying B. Then they would move their finger to the spot right next to it and say E. B has two phonemes, B and E. After sounding out both parts, the child would slide her finger along the arrow at the bottom and put those two parts together to make the complete word, B. I'll tell you how to get both of these freebies at the end of our webinar. Next up on our agenda is that 5-step plan I use to differentiate. Being able to teach kids at their just right level is the key to catapulting their progress because they are getting exactly what they need. The high kids are being stretched, and those struggling kiddos are building up their foundation. But how can we meet every student's needs in a class filled with very different reading levels? The answer, of course, is going to be laid out in this 5-step plan. So I'm going to give you a bird's eye view of the 5-step plan first, and then we're going to dive more deeply into each part. Step number 1 is assessing kids so we know exactly what they have already learned and what they need to practice next. Skipping this step is like trying to pull up driving directions to your friend's house without entering your current location. MapQuest would have no idea if you were starting in Cape Town, South Africa, Vancouver, Canada, or some random spot in between. Similarly, if we don't pinpoint where our students are starting, we will have no idea what to teach them next. So assessing always comes first. Step number 2 is grouping. In order to meet the needs of every child in class, even when there are very different reading levels, we need to organize students based on the results of those assessments that we completed in step 1. I'm going to walk you through the step-by-step process I use to create effective reading groups in just a moment. Number 3 on our 5-step plan is launching literacy centers. I have a serious love affair with centers because they have so many perks. They keep kids motivated. The activities are reusable, so after laminating them once, I can pull them out and use them again. Literacy Centers makes it really easy to differentiate. For instance, in our sight word station, I can have 2 groups playing the exact same game with a different word list, so everyone is practicing their just right words. And finally, centers teach kids independence because children learn how to stay on task and self-motivated. Going back to that 5-step plan, we have lucky number 4 next up, and that's setting goals for each group. Just like assessing our students helped us know where our kids were starting, setting goals helps us figure out where they're going to end up. So let's go back to our direction analogy from before. Having both the assessment and the goal setting is like opening up the MapQuest app and entering in the starting location and the destination. The assessment tells you where to start, and the goal setting marks where you're going to end up. So having both pieces of the puzzle helps you figure out all of the steps and turns that you need to take in between. That is why I plan for the end of the year first. It's called backwards design, and basically it means that you start with your end of year goals and work backwards so that you can figure out the timeline and sequence that you need to reach them. Let me give you an example of what backwards design looks like in an actual classroom. We're going to pretend that we are setting goals for a group of kindergartners who are relatively new readers. So these brand new kindergartners have strong pre-reading skills. They can rhyme, they show motivation, they can break words into parts, etc. But they don't know all of their letter sounds and they're not sounding out words yet. So by assessing these students, we have a really clear picture of where they're starting. So we need to figure out our ending point, our goal setting. So we look up our school district's end of year kindergarten standards and discover that by June, we need our students to memorize all 26 of their letter sounds. We need them to learn how to read consonant, vowel, consonant words like the words cat and hop. And we need them to memorize 30 high frequency words. Now we can start working backwards to see our timeline and sequence. To keep our example really simple, let's break our school year into 3 trimesters: fall, winter, and spring. Since 30 sight words divided by our 3 trimesters equals 10 sight words each trimester, we can easily see how quickly we need to move through this list. And now we also know that in order to reach our end of year goal, we need our students to memorize their letter sounds by the end of trimester number 1. Because then they're going to need to start working on sounding out those 3-letter consonant, vowel, consonant words in trimester 2. Since kids learn to read the beginning and ending consonant letters before they master those middle vowel sounds, so for example, in the word cat, a new reader will be able to sound out the k and the t that come at the start and end of that word cat before they can sound out the a in the middle. Since that's a sequence of how students learn how to read, we know that in trimester 2, we should focus on reading the first and last letters in those CVC words. And then in trimester 3, we can add in that middle vowel sound so that they can read all 3 letters at once. By working backwards, we were able to see the timeline and sequence for teaching our sight words and our phonics skills. Although we used a scaled down version of the process by looking at trimesters instead of breaking it down by months, the process is the same. We look at where kids are starting, where they're ending, and then we break down all of the steps in between. Going back to our 5-step plan, last but certainly not least is our secret formula for kicking the fear of getting it wrong to the curb. And that is staying flexible. Just like anything in life, we are bound to make some mistakes along the way, but we can always pull out our eraser and try again. If a group can't seem to stay on task, we can move 1 or 2 of the kids to a different group to see if that helps their focus. If students need more time to memorize their letter sounds, we can add in another 2 weeks of practice. The more you practice, the easier each step will be and the fewer mistakes you will make. So give yourself some grace and patience. Now let's take a moment just for a second to answer a couple of questions that Kimberly sent me. So this question comes from Danielle Oakes, and she said, when teaching phonological awareness skills, do you teach kids the vocabulary like segmenting, isolating, and phonemes? So Danielle, that's a great question, and I actually don't. The only reason I'm teaching you these skills is because this is what they're technically called. And I think it's really important as teachers that we know what the actual terms are so that we can be able to talk with researchers and other people in our field and have a really educated response to their questions, or have an educated discussion. But I don't use these terms with students ever, really. And to be honest, I wouldn't really use these terms with parents either. When I have my parent-teacher conferences and I am breaking down the skills that the kids are working on, I try and make it as simple and easy to understand as possible. There are a lot of terms that we use as educators that just come naturally to us, and they aren't as natural for those parents. They may never have even heard of what an isolating a phoneme is. Most of us, even educators, may not know what that is. So I try and keep it simple and use regular language. And then again, with the students, I would just not use those words at all. Okay, and then this question is from Ashley. Are the 5 major phonemic awareness skills given in order of learner readiness? So should they be secure on segmenting syllables before they are ready to understand swapping out phonemes? That is also a great question. So with some skills like phonics skills, for example, students do learn phonics skills in a very, or I guess I should say, they tend to learn phonics skills in a very clear order. So just like in that example I was giving you earlier, when I said looking at the word cat, a reader would first be able to sound out that k at the beginning of the word. Then they would learn how to sound out and recognize that t at the end of the word. And then they would be able to sound out the a in the middle. So that's a very clear sequence, and most readers will learn in that order. With the pre-reading skills, it tends to be a little bit different. And so for that reason, they don't necessarily learn those skills in a specific sequence. So I tend to work on them all at the same time. So for example, one day we might be doing a rhyming activity in our literacy center, and another day we might be doing a syllable segmenting activity. So we're kind of covering all of our bases and building up a really strong foundation without following a specific sequence. I'm going to take one more question. This one is from Brooke Beeson. She said, I have about 3 pre-K students that have already mastered letter recognition and sounds. Is it okay to go ahead with CVC words in pre-K, even though they will get the same in kindergarten? Yes, 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 Brooke. I cannot emphasize this enough. I think it's really critical that as educators, we are differentiating for our students and stretching our kids if they need to be stretched. So if your kids are ready to move on, I applaud you for recognizing it, number one, because that is fantastic and awesome of you. And I think that it's a brilliant next step to just start introducing those CVC words if they're ready, because that will set them up for success in kindergarten. They'll be able to move on to the next step in the sequence. So I'm going to hold off on, I know we have a couple more questions. I'm going to come back to them in just a minute, but I want us to move on to the next piece of our webinar, which is actually an assignment for you. So if you're following along in the webinar workbook, we're going to tackle the assignment that's on the bottom of page 4 of that workbook. If you're taking notes on a blank sheet of paper, don't worry, just jot down a number 1, 2, and 3 on your paper. Okay, so here's your assignment. I want you to list 3 things that are not going as well as you would like during your reading block. For example, maybe your kids are getting distracted during literacy center time, or some of your students are struggling to learn how to read, or maybe you're spending too much time researching lessons, or your prep work is taking forever. Whatever it is, I want you to write them down on your list, and I'm going to give you a minute or so to brainstorm. Now I want you to read through your list and circle just one thing that you would like to focus on over the next few days. If you're comfortable sharing the one thing you'll be focusing on this week, pop it into that comment box so that we can see some of the awesome growth that you guys have planned. Setting this goal will help you keep your eye on the prize. And as we roll up our sleeves over the next little bit and start digging a little deeper into assessment and grouping and planning, I want you to come back to your goal and start listing some solutions you think might fix it as they come up. This webinar is all about taking your teaching to the next level. So we're going to push ourselves to step up our game by making some tweaks and trying out some new strategies. So we have Jacqueline, who said she wants to work on her sight word center. Brittany Holiday said blending sounds. We have Erin, who said differentiating my centers more. Distractions, sight words, utilizing centers. Brandy said CVC. Patience, that's a great one. I know sometimes it can be hard to keep ourselves calm when there's so much going on, but I love that you're being honest about that and giving yourself the opportunity to grow. Literacy station, says Heather. Kelly says centers, and Bethany says, I want to try to control the noise. These are all awesome, awesome goals. Now that you've identified a few parts of your reading instruction that you'd like to improve, let's take a closer look at the individual parts of the 5-step plan so that you can go back and start listing some solutions you think might fix them. As I said earlier, assessment helps us figure out exactly what students have already learned and what they need to practice next. To help break down what we actually need to assess, I'm going to separate our kids into 2 camps. New readers, those are the students who are not reading words yet, like our 3, 4, and many 5-year-olds. And then other readers, children who have started sounding out words on their own. For our new readers, we need to assess those 4 pre-reading skills that we talked about earlier. Motivation, as you know, means finding out if they're interested in learning how to read. So we need to observe and see if our students look through books on their own. Do they ask about letters that they see around them? We also need to look at print concepts by noticing whether they are holding a book with the cover facing up. We need to see if they turn the page on the right side when they're finished looking at the pictures. Letter recognition means knowing the names or sounds of letters. Now, at this stage, again, kids do not need to know every letter name or sound, but they should be able to recognize, I tend to say about 13, so half of our alphabet letters, they should know, they should recognize them so that we know that they have the concept down. And finally, when we're assessing new students, we should look at their phonemic awareness skills. And this term, again, always used to trip me up. So remember that phonemic awareness starts with the word phone. So that reminds us that it has to do with hearing. And just like you hear on the telephone, phonemic awareness means hearing the parts of words and moving them around. So when we're assessing kids' phonemic awareness skills, we're looking at things like whether they can rhyme, whether they can break words into syllables like that elephant, even whether they can swap out those sounds, like when we ask them to change the first sound in cat to an sound to make a new word rat. The Elkinen sound boxes that I'm going to be giving you are a great way to build those phonemic awareness skills because they force kids to break words into parts. In this example, the student slid a counting chip into each square as he stretched out the 4 sounds in the word and. But you can also mix it up by having kids squish Play-Doh as they stretch out those sounds. So squish, a squish, rain. So these are the 4 pre-reading skills we need to assess when we're working with new readers: motivation, print concepts, letter recognition, and phonemic awareness. They make up that core foundation students will need to rely on when they start sounding out words a little later. So we want to make sure that they have these skills down pat and are not missing any holes. When we're assessing our other readers, we are looking for different things because they have already moved past these pre-reading skills, so we don't even need to waste their time or ours assessing them again. Instead, we need to assess their phonics skills to see if they recognize letter sounds and put them together to read a word. So we're going to be looking at things like, do they know their letter sounds? Have they learned tricky letter combinations like the digraphs sh and ch? We even need to find out if they know contractions. For example, can they take the words can, not, and shorten them to make the contraction can't? Assessing their phonics lets us see how well they're able to sound out words one part at a time. We also need to assess whole language. In case you're scratching your head and wondering, what is that? Don't worry, I've got you. Whole language is the fancy term for sight words. You might call it your Dolch list. Some people say fry words, snappy words, popcorn words, high frequency words. The possibilities go on, but they all mean the same thing: having students memorize the whole word instead of trying to sound it out phonetically, sound by sound. Now, whole language is important because there are a lot of common words that kids will see over and over again when they're reading, and they're going to save so much time and frustration if they can recognize those words right away without needing to sound it out bit by bit. For example, if you are reading a book, how many times do you see the word the on one page? About 20, right? If you had to sound it out every single time, you would be wasting a whole lot of time and you would probably be getting really frustrated. So we want to make sure that students are not experiencing that frustration, and that is why we have them memorize those sight words, those whole language words. How quickly and accurately students read is called their fluency. So this is the third thing that we assess with those other readers. If you've ever done a running record and you looked at how many words a child could read per minute, you were assessing their fluency. The more fluent a reader is, the more natural and ingrained things are in their brains because they don't have to work as hard to read. So they can start working on our last skill, which is reading comprehension. And that just means understanding what's going on in the story. Before we go any further, I want to dispel a common misconception. Many teachers, including me when I first started, think that kids should start working on reading comprehension right away. Because after all, if they can't track what's happening in stories, what is the purpose of reading? But guess what? We can actually take the pressure off of ourselves because until students are reading pretty fluently on their own, their brains aren't ready to work on reading comprehension too. Let me give you an example. I'm going to read a paragraph to you in a staccato word by word pace, just like a new reader would be reading. I want you to listen and try to keep up with what's happening. The car is blue. It was driving fast. Imagine if I started peppering you with comprehension questions now. Would you be able to recall anything that happened? What color was the car? How was it driving? There are so many pieces that are going on in the child's brain, so many parts that they have to tackle. And so it is so hard for them to remember and follow along with the story. Until students are reading pretty fluently, it's too overwhelming to expect them to sound out the words in a story on their own, and at the same time, process the content of the story too. And that means that we don't have to assess their reading comprehension until they're a little further in the process. A good rule of thumb is to start assessing reading comprehension when kids are at a middle of first grade reading level, which is it corresponds to a Fountas and Pinnell level E, or if you use the DRA system, it would be a DRA level 8. And that wraps up assessing kids to figure out what they already know so that we can determine where they need to go next. Let's tackle our next piece of the puzzle, planning just right literacy centers. We want our high kids to be working on skills that are at their just right level and our struggling kiddos to practice their just right skills. So how do we meet everyone's needs in a diverse classroom? Literacy centers. Let's talk about what my ideal literacy centers look like. This structure is based on the Daily 5 by Gail Bushey and Joan Mosier, but I've made some tweaks to make the system work a little better for me. I have a 1-hour literacy center block 4 days a week. I set up 6 stations on the first day, and I'm going to be telling you what those are in just a moment. Each group goes to 3 centers a day. They might go to the first 3 centers on Monday, and then they'll go to the next 3 centers on Tuesday. That gives me 2 days of activities that I set up one time and don't have to prep again. Groups stay at each center for 15 minutes before rotating. That gives me 45 minutes of solid literacy work time with a few minutes beforehand to explain the centers or give a mini lesson about one of the skills they'll be practicing. Plus, it also gives me a few minutes after for cleanup. These are my 6 stations. Depending on the day, reading could mean reading alone, reading together, reading around the room, or even reading big books. I like to mix it up to keep the stations fresh for kids, so I tell students what version they'll be doing when I introduce the centers for the day. Then I have 2 word workstations. The first one focuses on whole language and has kids practice reading and writing their sight words. They usually are playing one of my editable word work or sight word games here. Then I have a second word workstation that focuses on phonics. Depending what they need to work on, students might be practicing letter sounds or 3-letter words or digraphs. There are a whole lot of possibilities. I also have listen to reading. This one always makes me laugh because when I first started teaching, this meant listening to books on cassette tape. But since that is so 1990s, kids now listen to stories on the iPad or they listen to books on CD. My students have headphones so they don't distract the other children in the room. And then there's meet the teacher time when I have the chance to meet with each group of kiddos and really hone in on something that they need to practice. So let me give you a picture of what this looks like. And you're actually going to be getting a chart that's very similar to this so that you can start planning your literacy centers. If group number 1 goes to reading, word work number 1 and word work number 2 on Monday, then they go to work on writing, listen to reading, and meet the teacher on Tuesday. Meanwhile, group number 2 goes to word work number 1, word work number 2, and work on writing Monday. And then they go to listen to reading, meet the teacher, and reading on Tuesday. Group 3 is one more position to the right on the chart. So they start with word work number 2, work on writing, and listen to reading, and then they complete the rest on Tuesday. By the time the 2 days are through, kids have rotated through all 6 stations, and I've given small group and individualized instruction to every child in class. Then we repeat. We start all over. I put out 6 new stations on Wednesday, and the kids rotate through 3 centers that day and 3 centers on Thursday. That means that Friday is actually a day when we wouldn't do literacy centers. So on Fridays, I would tend to use that time for science instructions, a social studies activity, even an art project, just to kind of mix it up and keep things fresh. Karen asked, how do you manage your other kindergarten students while teaching your guided reading groups without constant reminders to be quietish? And this actually goes back to one of the goals that we have. So this is the million-dollar question, right? There are 4 strategies that help. First, starting small. During the first week of school, we only do read alone so that kids can really master it. Then the next week, I add in another center. Then I add a 3rd center the following week, and so on. By starting small and building up, I'm able to really focus on what I expect from students in each of those centers. And I can break down exactly what they need to be doing and help them succeed. That leads me to our next strategy, which is waiting for meet with the teacher time. I don't start that center until about 1 month into school so that I am free to roam around the room and help kids settle into the routine of the other centers before I tie myself to a desk. Observing group dynamics can be really helpful too. If there's a group that just cannot seem to pull it together, I like to stand back and watch. Maybe the activity is too difficult for them, or maybe 2 of the kids just can't seem to gel. Once I identify the problem, I can either provide additional teaching support if they need more help, or I can move kids around if the group needs a little shift. And finally, using parent volunteers or aides can make a huge difference if that's an option you have. I always have a parent training session at the beginning of the year, and I outline the kind of feedback and support that I'd like them to give the kids. We cover things like helping kids find the answer on their own instead of giving it to them, using positive redirection instead of snapping. But having an extra set of hands is a huge help. Planning literacy centers can be time consuming, so I want to make it a little faster for you with 2 more downloads. The first freebie you'll be getting is this clickable literacy menu. Just find the center you're trying to plan and click on one of the activities that fits the skill you want your students to work on. So for example, if you were coming over here and you were going to work on whole language word work, you'd scroll down to that section and you'd click one of the activities and it will open up the web page that has the activity right there for you. You can see another one with the editable unicorn board game. The second surprise I have in store for you is an editable planning chart. So you can edit the names of your centers and groups so that this form is actually a perfect fit for your classroom. So if you were giving your group color names, type those into the left-hand column. If you name your center something fun and whimsical, type the names in that column or in the top row. Then you're going to hit print and start mapping out when each group will go to each center, just like I showed you the layout of my groups in the example a little earlier. I'm going to tell you how to grab both of those downloads at the end of our webinar, so be sure to stick around for that too. Work groups can really make or break the success of our literacy centers, so I want to make sure that we talk about some ways that we can create effective clusters. The first thing I do when I'm creating my groups is I make a little chart of my students' reading levels like this. Student names are on the left and their reading level is on the right. If you're feeling up to it, you can even make the chart in an Excel spreadsheet to speed up the next step just a little bit. So I sort the list into groups like this. So I'm sorting them by reading level. I clump my high group together, my medium high group in a different spot, then my medium cluster, and so on. Now don't worry, these are not the actual names that I use for the groups, because I know that calling students the high group or the low group would be a major recipe for tears and sadness. But in the beginning of the process, labeling it this way helps me easily see where the class falls. I can switch the names to something fun like Red Rockets or Blue Boomerangs a little bit later. In this example, we have a pretty even spread of levels. There are between 3 and 5 kids in each group. So I would just keep students sorted just like this. But let's say that the example looked a little different and it looked a little bit more like this, where we have one jumbo-sized clump of students in that medium-high yellow level. Split that group into 2. 8 kids in one group is way too many to be effective. By splitting one clump of 8 students into 2 groups of 4, we create a much more manageable size of students. So my general rule of thumb is to keep groups to a maximum of 6 kids each so that I can give students individual coaching when the group meets with me. They also tend to fit comfortably around the horseshoe table that I use during Meet the Teacher time, and I can monitor their reading. 2 other things to consider when we're grouping kids are pairs are a plus. If a child falls right on the cusp of 2 groups and both groups have an odd number of students, you might want to think about moving that child up or down so that the groups have an even number. With an even number, kids can easily pair up for partner games and read together time. And secondly, personalities matter. A couple of years ago, I had a pair of boys in my 2nd grade class who were super competitive with each other. They battled it out on the soccer field every recess. They kept tabs on who finished their classwork first, who read the most pages, who spelled more words correctly on their spelling test. You get the idea. They both belonged in the high group, but I knew that if I put them together, they would spend more time battling with each other than working on reading. So I divided the high group into 2 smaller sets, and splitting one group into 2 did mean a little bit more shuffling on my end, but it paid off big time because the students were able to actually stay focused during their work. So definitely take a closer look at each group to ensure that student dynamics will not cause a disruption. Stephanie asked, how far do you go with differentiation of phonics and spelling? Do you have separate lists or shortened lists? So to answer this, I need to break down my answer into what I did at the beginning of my teaching career and then what I did a little bit later. So in the beginning, I only differentiated the sight word activities because that's what felt easiest to me. My school had a sequence list of sight words. So, we'd start with words like me, of, the, and then the kids would move on to the next list and the next list and so on. So I assessed how many words each child had already learned, and then I had them work on the ones that were still tripping them up. For example, my low group might be working on list number 1, and my high group might be working on list number 5. I like to use color coding for my groups. So since the low group always knew to grab the blue bucket during their word workstation, I would assign a different color to my high groups. The high group always knew to grab the yellow bucket, etc. Then I became really comfortable with the step-by-step sequence of teaching phonics, and I was able to differentiate that too. So my low readers could grab their blue bucket of letter names, of letter name puzzles when they went to the Phonics Center, and my high readers would know that they needed to grab their yellow bucket with digraph puzzles. So just like anything, I recommend starting small and then building on it so that you don't get overwhelmed. Speaking of overwhelmed, that is exactly how I felt when I started teaching 14 years ago. This is a picture of me. This is my first year of teaching. I'd taken a handful of literacy classes for my undergrad degree, but I didn't really understand the step-by-step for teaching kids how to read. I was spending countless hours and nearly every weekend planning my reading activities, and I wished that I had an easy roadmap for putting everything into place. So over the next decade, I became obsessed with reading. I spent thousands of hours researching best teaching practices and trying them out on my own students. I studied what made my mentor teachers so successful, and I figured out a step-by-step system for teaching kids how to read. My students' reading took off. My high kids soared even higher. My struggling students started catching up. I want you to have the same success. Imagine feeling empowered to skyrocket students' reading progress with an easy-to-follow step-by-step plan. Imagine feeling empowered to assess effectively so you can quickly pinpoint what students need to learn next. Are you ready to teach reading more effectively with less planning time? Do you want to help students not just improve, but excel? I am so excited to introduce the Reading Roadmap. It's the training I wish I had 14 years ago. The 4-week course walks you through the strategies that I know without a doubt will accelerate your students' reading growth and launch your teaching to the next level. When you join, you'll receive my printable assessments that pinpoint exactly what each student already knows and what they need to tackle next. My favorite part of these assessments is that they include the specific follow-up activity you need to complete if students are struggling. So it takes all of the guesswork out of the process. You'll also receive the step-by-step sequence I use to teach phonics, whole language, and reading comprehension to kids. I'm going to show you the exact order for teaching letter names, letter sounds, digraphs, blends, and everything in between. No more worrying about whether you are doing it right. To make it easy for you to plan your literacy centers, the Reading Roadmap comes with 240 printable games, like the ones that you're getting today, organized by skill. It is a major time saver. Plus, you'll also have 2 live group coaching calls with me, tackling your specific needs. Expect breakthrough moments, advanced strategies, and rubber meets the road problem solving. Maybe you feel overwhelmed about teaching kids how to read and you need an easy step-by-step for putting everything into place. Maybe you worry that some of your students are slipping through the cracks because you can't figure out how to differentiate your activities for everyone. Or maybe you need help setting up effective and motivating literacy centers. You do not have to pay $1,000 for a graduate level reading course because I'm about to hand you a proven, easy to follow system for teaching reading so that you can eliminate your second guessing and become a teaching rock star. You are going to join a supportive community of incredibly dedicated teachers who have the same goals, passions, and commitment to education that you do, so you can brainstorm and collaborate and troubleshoot. I am so excited to show you how to easily track student progress so you know exactly what they need to learn next. Keep kids motivated so that they love learning to read. Plan reading lessons efficiently so you can take back your weekends. And most importantly, make sure that you reach every goal you wrote on your sheet earlier today so that every bit of energy you put into reading instruction has wildly effective results. When you enroll in the Reading Roadmap, you get access to a 4-week training program giving you easy-to-follow videos and sanity-saving printables. You receive a private Facebook group with like-minded educators. More than 240 printable literacy centers organized by skill. Bi-weekly group coaching calls with me to help you troubleshoot along the way, plus a treasure trove of cheat sheets to save you time and sanity. But when you join by tomorrow at midnight, you will also receive 3 action taker bonuses. First, you will get instant access to a bonus module diving deeper into the 4 signs kids are ready to read. You'll receive a must-have assessment that makes it crystal clear whether students have mastered those 4 pre-reading skills and tells you what activities to do if they're not. Plus, you'll also receive my 90 days of lesson plans that walk you through exactly what I teach, the mini lessons, the literacy centers, everything. When you add all of that up, it's a total value of $1,237 worth of teaching must-haves. And that's not even counting the unannounced surprises and value bombs I'll be dropping on you once we get started. But because I'm super excited to welcome you and watch you become a rock star reading teacher in just a few weeks, I'm giving you the opportunity to enroll in the Reading Roadmap today at the special promo price of just 4 monthly payments of $97 or 1 payment of $297. If you're on the fence or if other trainings have left you stranded and skeptical, then I want to give you every opportunity to put the Reading Roadmap into action and finally become the rockstar reading teacher you've been dreaming about. That's why I'm giving you a full 30 days to go through the training, keep up with the assignments, implement the systems, and hit play on your new teaching system. And if you reach out within 30 days to show me that you've kept up with all the work and for some crazy reason still haven't seen any progress, then I'll be happy to return the investment. The Reading Roadmap is the training I wish I had 14 years ago, and now I'm proud to give you access to the system that I know without a doubt will accelerate your students' reading and kick things up to the next level. With a complete course leading you every step of the way and a 30-day guarantee, there really hasn't been a better time to give it an honest shot. Class officially starts next Monday, January 22nd. The sign-up link is in your email inbox, so hop over to the Reading Roadmap page and join. And while you're there, you can grab all of those bonus printables I've been telling you about along the way. They're a great preview of the awesome resources that are waiting for you in the Reading Roadmap. Simply scroll down to the very bottom of the web page and click on the link that says Webinar Bonus. It's in the footer of that page. Today's training is just the tip of the iceberg to your massive transformation. I am so excited to give you access to the proven strategies that I know will launch your teaching to the next level. I cannot wait to take you through the step-by-step of becoming a rockstar reading teacher in 4 weeks flat. See you on the other side.